Most of what we know about Bjorn Ironside comes from the stories surrounding his raids alongside his brothers, as well as his relationship with his father, legendary chieftain Ragnar Lothbrok. We see most of his adventures appear in the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, the tale of Ragnar's sons, and of course everyone's favourite Gesta Danorum by the historian Saxo Grammaticus. Bjorn Ironside was thought to have been a fierce warrior, a leader in raids, and a man who swept across the battlefield to bring fury upon his enemies during the 9th century. The moniker Ironside is likely to have referred to his strong, unyielding character, as well as a reference to his durability in battle, that he literally had sides like iron. He was thought to have been a great Viking chief, as well as something as a skilled naval commander that saw him sail to many places, including France, Spain, Italy, and England, as well as through the Mediterranean Sea, most notably alongside Andalusia, and even the coast of North Africa. He was said to have been such a prolific Viking that he even brought the fight to Rome, or at least what he thought was Rome. But more on that later. Perhaps the best known source of Bjorn's origin comes out of the tale of Ragnar Lothbrok, a 13th century Icelandic saga that details much of the supposed life of Ragnar Lothbrok, but also the life of Bjorn's mother, Aslak. Aslak is described as being the daughter of Sigurd, a legendary dragon slayer, and Brynhild, a Valkyrie of Germanic mythology. She is adopted by a poor Norwegian family who name her Kraka, or Crow, so as to keep her lineage hidden. But one day, Ragnar Lothbrok, who was still reeling from the death of his wife Thora, went raiding along the Norwegian coast, where he stumbles upon the poor household of Aslak. He becomes infatuated with her beauty and wit, and after devising a riddle for her to solve, he marries her. Aslak gives birth to several sons, and amongst Bjorn Ironside are Ivar the Boneless, Visturk, Ragnvold, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye. The brothers are noted as having gone raiding and hunting together, with Ivar and Bjorn taking on more leadership roles. Unfortunately, the brothers were not invincible, and the saga tells us that Ragnvold was cut down in one particular raid. Bjorn and his brothers would emerge victorious despite their brother's death, and it did not seem to dissuade them from going ahead on more raids. In fact, they would actually make their way to Sweden, where they would do battle with the Swedish king Eystein Belli, who had something of a vendetta against Ragnar Lothbrok after Ragnar had promised to marry his daughter, but ultimately went back on his word when Aslak gave birth to their final son, Sigurd Snake in the Eye. Ragnar's sons Eric and Agnar from his previous marriage with Thora would battle against Eystein Belli, but were not successful in their campaign as they became stumped by a magical cow that appeared to protect the Swedish army. Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, and Visturk then tried their hands where their half-brothers had failed and descended upon the Swedes. They were said to have been ruthless as they went about pillaging everything in sight and killing anyone who stood in their way. They not only thwarted the magical cow, but also breached through the Swedish defences and killed King Eystein Belli. It is in their celebration that Ragnar realises that his sons have truly outshone him, something he is unwilling to admit. While his sons are his own blood and a reflection of him, he cannot accept that he is no longer the top dog amongst the Vikings. It causes him to decide upon a brash move, as he takes but 2 ships and sails to England, promising to conquer the land. It is with this impetuousness that Ragnar meets his demise, as he is captured by King Aelle of Northumbria and thrown into a snake pit. The saga continues in the Tale of Ragnar's Sons, another 13th century Icelandic saga that explains more on the life of Bjorn and his brothers in the wake of Ragnar's death. We see Ivar strategize to gain territory in England, most notably York, and it isn't long before Bjorn and the others descend upon King Aelle, butcher his armies, and viciously torture him. Their vengeance for their father's death is only sated after they perform the Blood Eagle on King Aelle, a twisted and particularly malevolent Viking execution ritual that saw one's back cut open, his ribs severed and stretched outwards, and his lungs pulled out. While the saga is keen to point to this diabolical execution method as being that which killed King Aelle, historians do question its validity, and it is thought that this encounter was a fictitious one, or one for the sagas, given that the Gesta Danorum by Saxa Grammaticus does not appear to mention it at all. The sons of Ragnar are then detailed as going far and wide, most notably Bjorn, who learns of stories pertaining to Rome. In the year 859, or thereabouts, Bjorn assembled a Viking fleet and set sail for the Mediterranean. It's understood that Viking fleets would sail along the Atlantic coast of the Iberian Peninsula, though the raids against these areas were usually met with either Christian or Muslim resistance. There would be a series of skirmishes along Andalusia, most notably catapult fire, that Bjorn and the other Vikings did not have a strategic answer to. Through perseverance though, Andalusia would be breached, and areas like Gibraltar were sacked, ravaged and looted. Bjorn would also find his way pillaging the south of France, but perhaps one of his most iconic raids comes from where he captured the Italian coastal city named Pisa. Some modern day scholars also lean towards the idea that Bjorn Ironside became companions with another Viking named Hastin, and that these two men, having taken Pisa, set their sights on a bigger prize, Rome itself. Bjorn and Hastin began to siege what they believed was Rome, but in actuality it turned out to be a mere ancient Italic city known as Luni. The town's fortifications were versatile, and the defence set up around Luni served well in keeping the Vikings out. Through this, you might have forgiven Bjorn for believing that this was Rome, for he and his men were not about to take the walls of Luni anytime soon. Realising that to even try to storm the walls of Luni and take the city by force would be futile, Bjorn came up with a cunning plan. He had his men send messengers into the city, where they would seek out the bishop and clergyman to let them know that Bjorn was dying. They pretended that they were at a loss without their leader, and that they were all but defeated. They also claimed that Bjorn had a deathbed conversion to Christianity, and therefore wished to receive Christian sacraments and to be buried in the consecrated grounds within the church. The bishops and clergymen were all too relieved to hear this news. They allowed the body of Bjorn to be brought through the city gates in a coffin or a stretcher, escorted by Vikings who were said to be hiding weapons under their clothes. After entering the church, Bjorn leapt up and drew his steels and began to butcher any who opposed him. He fought his way back to the city gates and was able to open them, allowing the rest of his warriors in. Any resistance set up by the city of Luni was soon quelled, and Bjorn would have the area in the palm of his hand. He demanded the residents to kneel before him and declare him the ruler of the city, and as you might imagine, no one was going to say anything to dispute this. It's unknown what Bjorn did with Luni, or how long he stayed there as its ruler, but what we do know is that Bjorn would set sail again for Gibraltar, most likely after learning that Rome wasn't where he thought it was, and possibly realising that taking such a city proved to be too hard of a task, especially given how hard he'd worked to take Luni. However, during his journey, he was intercepted by a Muslim force. It's said that this force caused Bjorn to lose a large volume of ships, and that essentially he was defeated. It's noted that he also found it immensely difficult to deal with the catapult fire that came from the shores of Andalusia when trying to infiltrate Gibraltar, as noted earlier, and this may have served as a deterrent for future Viking raids on the area. Other historical notes state that Bjorn and the Vikings were intercepted by a Muslim force on their way home from Luni, but that the Vikings were decimated in a bloody spectacle, causing Bjorn to slip away with only a partial amount of his treasure from Luni. Some say that only a handful of Viking ships made it out of this bloody naval battle, and that morale amongst Bjorn's men had taken a massive hit. It is believed that Bjorn would have the men attack the coastal areas of Spain as a last-ditch attempt to regain some of that which they had lost against the Muslim resistance, and perhaps to try and end the voyage on a more positive note. While he was able to escape this encounter, it is unknown whether he went on any further notable excursions. From what we understand, Bjorn would retire back in Scandinavia, where he would live the rest of his days as a rich man. Others believe that Bjorn retired in Sweden, a land that is noted as being his in the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok. Others believe that through the inheriting of Sweden in the sagas, Bjorn was actually the king of Sweden and the founder of the dynasty of Munzo, a royal bloodline that would rule Sweden until the late 11th century. Bjorn is noted as having two sons, Rafael and Erik Bjornsson, and it would be Erik who would inherit the Swedish throne after Bjorn's passing. Meanwhile, in the Gesta Danorum, Aslaug, who's thought to have most certainly been Bjorn's mother in the sagas, is actually omitted. Some believe that by this, Bjorn's parentage switches to Thora, or some unnamed woman that Ragnar had relations with. The Gesta Danorum also sees Bjorn accompanying his father on many raids across both Scandinavia and the British Isles, and that Bjorn even received Sweden as a reward for his courage and valour on the battlefield. The Gesta Danorum goes on to tell a similar tale to that of the sagas, where Bjorn and his brothers swear vengeance for their father's death at the hands of King Eilar. After landing at England, Bjorn and the Vikings along with his brothers storm through Eilar's forces and kill the king, thus completing their revenge. After this event, however, Bjorn is noted as returning home and is not mentioned again in the Gesta Danorum. Based on what we know from the sagas and the Gesta Danorum regarding Bjorn, it is hard to say what really happened, especially considering the texts appear to contradict each other in various sections. There are certainly some truths recorded in history, however, including the existence of King Eilar, who did indeed rule Northumbria in the 9th century, and did witness the Vikings land on his shores. He also met his fate in the battle with the Great Viking Invasion, now often dubbed as the Great Heathen Army, that was said to have been led by Bjorn and his brother Ivar. Like Ragnar though, the exact exploits of Bjorn Ironside are lost, and it's possible that much of his life dips in and out of history and mythology.